Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ehsan Omid, and this is MiCasa, a housing project in Boyle Heights. The project is positioned between Bridge Street and Cesar Chavez Avenue and opens toward the city through active ground floor spaces and rooftop farming terraces. MiCasa begins with a simple question. What does it mean to truly live somewhere? Not only to occupy a space, but to belong to it economically, socially, and over time. Rather than approaching housing only as shelter, MiCasa explores housing as a social, ecological, and cultural system. In this presentation, I'll explain the conditions that shape the project, the theoretical framework behind it, and the architectural strategies that emerged from those ideas. This mural represents Boyle Heights, a neighborhood that has maintained its identity through decades of social and economic pressure. Boyle Heights has been predominantly Mexican-American for generations. That continuity occurred because communities remained in place over time. But remaining in Boyle Heights is becoming increasingly difficult. During the 1930s, redlining policies restricted investment and access to credit within the neighborhood, and those inequalities never fully disappeared. Today, rising housing costs and gentrification continue placing pressure on long-term residents and younger generations who can no longer afford to stay. As people leave, the neighborhood's identity also weakens because Boyle Heights depends on the people who sustain its culture every day. This connects to postcolonial architectural theory, which examines how space reflects systems of power, displacement, and cultural identity, and to theories of collective memory, which understand architecture as part of preserving social and cultural continuity. The project therefore asks, what can architecture do in response to this condition? This diagram shows the core logic of MiCasa through two connected strategies. On one side, the project reduces living expenses through passive environmental systems such as solar panels, rainwater harvesting, shading devices, building orientation, and cross-ventilation. On the other side, the project creates opportunities for local economic participation through learning spaces, rooftop farming, and ground floor commercial programs. Together, these systems reduce living costs while creating opportunities for local economic participation. At the center of both strategies is the larger goal of strengthening long-term community stability within Boyle Heights. The project framework is organized around three concepts: power, inclusivity, and ecology. Power is informed by post-colonial architectural theory, particularly discussions around access, displacement, spatial inequality, and the relationship between architecture and systems of control. Within this project, power is understood as access not only to housing, but also to economic participation and the ability to remain in the neighborhood over time. Inclusivity draws from feminist approaches in architecture, which challenge standardized housing models and instead emphasize everyday life, participation, caregiving, visibility, and diverse social conditions. Ecology builds on ecological architectural theory and sustainable design, where environmental systems are understood not only as technical solutions, but also as social and economic tools connected to long-term living conditions. In this project, passive systems and natural resource strategies serve as tools to reduce living costs and improve affordability. To better understand how these systems could operate at an architectural level, I examined Via Verde. What interested me most was the way sustainability is integrated into the building's organizational structure rather than treated as an additional layer. Roof gardens, shared courtyards, circulation systems, and health programs all work together to connect environmental performance, collective life, and economic resilience. Via Verde demonstrated how environmental, social, and economic systems could operate together in an architectural framework. This approach aligns with ecological architectural theory, which treats sustainability as an integrated social, environmental, and economic framework rather than simply technological performance. The site sits between two different urban conditions. To one side is a lower-scale residential fabric, while the opposite side is surrounded by major healthcare facilities, including White Memorial Hospital and nearby medical centers. Rather than responding to only one condition, the project negotiates between both urban scales simultaneously. The proximity to these healthcare facilities also suggested an opportunity: housing that prioritizes health, accessibility, well-being, and everyday living conditions for both workers and residents. MiCasa connects housing, healthcare, food production, and walkability into a broader, healthy living system. This approach aligns with feminist spatial theory, which evaluates architecture through the realities of everyday life and diverse user needs rather than a single standardized housing model. These surrounding conditions then directly inform the building massing. The massing develops through three primary moves. The first is the height transition. The building steps gradually between the larger medical office buildings and the smaller residential structures surrounding the site, improving daylight access, shading, and natural ventilation. The second move is the pedestrian connection. A public pathway cuts through the project from Bridge Street to Cesar Chavez Avenue, opening the site toward the city rather than separating it from the neighborhood. This strategy reflects contemporary urban theory, which critiques fragmented urban conditions and instead promotes porosity, connectivity, permeability, and collective public life. The pathway activates the ground floor through shops, workshops, gathering areas, and everyday public activity. The third move is the cascading roofscape. The stepped terraces generated through the massing create productive rooftop farming areas, outdoor gathering spaces, and improved environmental performance through increased airflow and daylight penetration. Boyle Heights is not demographically uniform, and the building should not behave as though it is. MiCasa is designed for multiple resident groups, including healthcare workers, immigrant families, elderly couples, residents with disabilities, and single-parent households. Rather than treating these groups as abstract categories, their needs directly shape the project's spatial decisions. Feminist approaches in architecture critique standardized housing models and instead emphasize diversity in family structures, accessibility conditions, and everyday living experiences. The building includes 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units to accommodate households of different sizes and living conditions. Accessible circulation, quieter green areas, outdoor gathering spaces, and communal programs are integrated throughout the project to support this diversity. That inclusivity then extends into the productive systems operating throughout the project. This is where the project's economic cycle begins, at the ground floor level. During the week, these spaces operate as shared working and gathering areas for residents. At other times, they transform into farming workshops where residents learn rooftop farming systems and basic agricultural knowledge. The workshops act as the starting point of the larger productive system within the building. The ground floor becomes a learning environment connected directly to economic participation. This reflects postcolonial architectural theory, in which architecture is understood not only as an occupation of space, but also as a means of empowerment, access, and participation within larger economic systems. From this point, the activity continues vertically toward the rooftop landscape. The rooftop terraces serve as the project's productive heart. Created through the cascading roof form, these stepped farming plots allow residents to grow vegetables, herbs, and organic produce for personal use and small-scale economic activity. The rooftop becomes productive ecological infrastructure supporting food production, social interaction, and economic resilience. Rainwater is collected through the sloped roof geometry, directed towards central collection points, and reused for irrigation throughout the farming terraces. Beyond production itself, these spaces also begin to shape relationships between residents. This rooftop system is designed not only for agriculture, but also for interaction between different resident groups. The rooftop supports interaction between generations, residents with disabilities, and immigrant families through shared daily activities. In this project, inclusivity is approached through participation rather than isolated programming. This reflects theories of collective urban life and vernacular social space, where architecture supports community relationships through everyday shared practices and lived experience. The final stage of this system then returns to the ground floor through distribution and local exchange. The final stage of the cycle happens at street level through the fresh market, restaurant spaces, and small commercial units integrated along the pedestrian pathway. Produce grown on the rooftop can either be consumed directly by residents or sold within these commercial spaces. The ground floor therefore acts as the public interface of the project's economic cycle. Rather than treating affordability only as reduced rent, MiCasa explores how architecture can support long-term economic participation directly within residential life. For this system to function successfully, however, the project also requires an active and socially connected public environment. This idea closely aligns with Jane Jacobs's concept of eyes on the street. Safety here is not created through walls or isolation, but through continuous public activity and visibility. Along the pedestrian pathway, the project introduces movement through workshops, commercial units, gathering areas, wellness spaces, and resident circulation throughout the day. Visual connections between floors strengthen safety through visibility, participation, and active occupation of space. Beyond Jacobs' concept, this also relates to feminist spatial theory, which connects safety to accessibility, participation, and social visibility. In this project, safety emerges through participation and everyday use rather than separation from the surrounding neighborhood. At the building scale, the project incorporates a series of passive environmental systems to reduce energy demand and improve indoor comfort. Natural ventilation is supported through the building massing and open corridor systems, allowing airflow to move naturally through residential units. Recessed balconies and exterior shading devices reduce solar heat gain while maintaining daylight access throughout the building. The stepped roof geometry improves both ventilation and sunlight control across the project. In addition, the building uses CLT and mass timber structures because of their lower environmental impact, thermal performance, and long-term durability. These systems are not treated only as environmental strategies. Lower energy consumption also reduces residents' monthly utility expenses, directly connecting ecological performance to long-term affordability. This approach reflects ecological architectural theory, in which sustainability is understood not only through environmental performance, but also through its relationship to social equity, affordability, and everyday living conditions. MiCasa is not intended as a final solution to gentrification in Boyle Heights, but as one possible response shaped by the identity and conditions of its site. In this project, rooftop farming was the primary strategy given the site's relationship to healthcare, wellness, and everyday living. The system helps reduce living costs while creating opportunities for participation and small-scale income within residential life. Other sites within Boyle Heights could respond differently. Communities shaped by art, craft, or local production may develop entirely different residential systems that reflect their own culture and needs. Rather than creating identical housing models across the city, the project proposes site-responsive residential frameworks that help communities remain in place while protecting local identity from displacement and gentrification. Ultimately, MiCasa is not only about housing, it is about creating conditions where families can stay together, communities can remain connected, and local culture can continue evolving within the neighborhood that shaped it.